Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Joint Standards Committee for the City of York Council. The first item on the agenda is the appointment of Chair of the Committee for the municipal year 2022 to 2023. Please could I have a nomination from City of York councillors?
I move Councillor Rowley.
Thank you.
Thank you. Second that.
Thank you. So all in favour of Councillor Rowley being appointed Chair? Thank you. Councillor Rowley, you're now appointed Chair of Joint Standards Committee for this year.
Thank you, Janie. Thank you, members, for that vote. The next item is we'll deal with the item which is 3 on your agenda, but actually it's a very simple item to deal with, and that's the appointment of Vice Chair. Under the new constitution, the Chair of this committee is a City of York councillor, and the Vice Chair of this committee is a parish councillor. That's always been convention, but it's now written into the constitution. We have got a parish councillor present, but only virtually. Parish Councillor Rawlings, are you?
Yes, I am with you, Chair, and could I just quickly say thank you for making the arrangements for joining. Unfortunately, I didn't think it was fair, since I'm suffering from COVID, to attend, but felt well enough to actually participate. I do understand that during the meeting, you'll let me participate, but I will not be able to vote because of constitutional issues. Lovely.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Rawlings. We would normally then therefore go to a nomination and vote for a Vice Chair from our parish council members. However, we don't have any that are physically present, so I'm just asking if we can carry that over, keeping Councillor Rawlings as the Vice Chair under the appointment that was made at full council until the next meeting, at which point we will hopefully have parish councillors available. Can I just have just an agreement of that, just a nod on that? Thank you very much. So that's items 2 and items 3. Welcome to this meeting. We have got some apologies for absence at the moment. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Wardby, Parish Councillor Wardby, and Parish Councillor Chambers. I haven't had any apologies from anybody else. I am aware that Councillor Galvin, who is a member of this committee, isn't here, and he's either going to be on his way. In fact, no, that's not him. So that's it in terms of the apologies. So item number 1 or item number 3 on the agenda is declarations of interest, and so at this point I'm going to ask if anyone has any declarations of interest that they wish to make in relation to items that are on the agenda. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to declare an interest in item 13, and we'll leave the room whilst that matter is discussed.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else? No, that's fine. Item number 4 is the exclusion of the press and public, and again we try to make this meeting as open as we can. It is being recorded and it's available for people to see at a later date or to watch live if they so wish, but there are items that are of a confidential nature that come to agenda item number 13, and we would normally take that because of the confidential nature of the report. I would ask that we can exclude the press and public at that particular point. So can I just have a vote on that, please, if you're happy for us to? Okay, that's fine. Takes us to item number 5, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. That was held on the 20th of April.
Chair, if I may just say something on this item.
Please do, sir.
I'm conscious that there was only myself in full attendance for this meeting, and you joined shortly after the start. I chaired it, and therefore I think it's right that I voice that I actually am quite content with the minutes as read as being a true and accurate reflection of the meeting that took place.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rawlings. And again, just for the benefit of our new members, I came in at item number 8 on the agenda, but I didn't chair. I carried on allowing Councillor Rawlings to chair that full meeting. Sorry, can I? Yeah, I'll take it as I've seen the hands. Councillor De Goin.
I obviously wasn't present at the meeting, but I have just noted one inaccuracy on page 4, paragraph 53, which refers to the call-in on a decision by the executive member for transport, which wasn't the case. It was the executive member for
it was climate change. Yeah.
So, yeah, so that's just a factual correction. I don't know what was said or not at the meeting, but.
No, that's a very, very well spotted. We'll make those changes. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. I'll just say that I left for the last item on there, but I was present during all the other items and I'm happy with the minutes as well.
Okay. In that case, those that, yeah, it does say that you left the room. On page 1, it says that you left the room, so that's fine. So for those, and I think there's only 2 of us that were present that can confirm that they were accurate and accept those minutes. Can we just accept those? Yeah. Okay. It was remiss of me, given the elation of being voted as chair at the beginning of the meeting. I have not welcomed formally our 2 new members that are around the table. So a welcome to Councillor Dugoyne, who joins us, and to Councillor Kilbane. At this point, I would like just to place on record our thanks and appreciation for Councillor Baker and also Councillor Douglas, who did a sterling job for the 3 years that they were on this committee. I would also welcome Councillor Galvin, but he's not here. But again, I would like to record our thanks as a committee for the work that Councillor Carr did in the 3 years that he was on this committee. You know, really, really good work in terms of being available and being an integral part of what we do. So thank you for that. So forgive me for being remiss there. Item number 6 is the minutes of the subcommittees, which are on page 7 and 8. So this is one that's slightly difficult to approve, is the minutes for the 19th of May meeting, because nobody that was at that meeting in terms of members of that subcommittee are present here. So I think it would be difficult for us to approve those. So can I suggest that we hold that one over to the next meeting?
Chair, we'd have to speak to Parish Councillor Wardby.
Yeah.
Around those, because I wasn't present at this.
No. So that's that'll be done at the next meeting. I'm going to move to item number 8 on the agenda, which is public participation. We have one registered speaker, and it's Councillor Waters, who needs no introduction. So I'm going to ask Councillor Waters to come, and he doesn't need to be reminded of his 3 minutes, because I know he has everything down to a T. So Councillor Waters, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Just like to refer members to agenda item 13 and the case reference 2021/13 in Annex A, a complaint I submitted. Normally, I'd defend anyone's right to free speech, but in this case, an executive member used a Twitter account badged up clearly, giving this member's status as a councillor and their executive member status to tell another political party to piss off. It matters not what you think of the political party involved, the views of that party, or the context in which piss off was used. It is there, clearly documented on a public Twitter account with no disclaimer as to personal views or comments, an account clearly used to promote York Council business. Again, I'll say I wouldn't normally have got involved, except that this clear documented breach of the standards code took place whilst I was having a completely unprovable and, in my opinion, false standards complaint pushed through the system by the monitoring officer before it was completely thrown out by the standards hearing committee. As a standards committee, you then rightly took the power from the monitoring officer to act as sole arbiter in which cases to pursue. But in my case, and the cases involving the council leader, and of course this executive member, are useful to demonstrate a 2-tier system that officers would happily operate if this committee was not robust enough. I don't have much at all to do with social media, much of what seems to be electronic graffiti to me, but nevertheless, if it's deemed acceptable behaviour for a councillor on a public social media platform to tell another organisation to piss off, what possible credibility can this standards regime have? Is the phrase piss off now deemed acceptable for councillors to use in all forums, meetings, for example? We've seen standards fall with the obscene gestures caught on webcast by a council officer last year without apparent sanction. Are we now to witness councillors telling one another to piss off at meetings seemingly endorsed by a standards committee? I purposely write down a 3-minute piece for public participation to avoid any temptation to slip into what I'll term industrial language that I might well do if not speaking unscripted. But do I need to bother now if piss off is deemed to be an acceptable term for councillors to use? I appreciate your discussion on case 2021/13
30 seconds.
will be in private, but I hope you take these points on board in your discussions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Your comments have been noted and will be taken into account when that particular item is discussed later in the meeting. Thank you very much. Councillor Galvin, welcome to our meeting. You have missed out on the opportunity of being nominated as the chair. So you missed out the opportunity of being nominated as the chair. So can I welcome you to this meeting, Councillor Galvin. We have already recorded our thanks and appreciation to your predecessor, Councillor Carr, and we look forward to working with you in this next municipal year.
It's like 1 o'clock. All age, Chairman, which you don't know much about it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So, Councillor Galvin, you need no introduction to members around the table. We all know of you, and we admire your work. Just to let you know that we have no parish councillors here in person, but we do have Parish Councillor Rawlings. It has joined us virtually because he has unfortunately tested positive for COVID, and although he feels well, he felt it was right for him to absent himself physically from this meeting, but he is here virtually. If you wish to say hello to him, that would be really, really good. He will hear and acknowledge. Are you there, Councillor Rawlings? Oh, we've lost.
Good afternoon, Councillor Galvin. Good to see you again.
Okay, thank you very much. So that brings our public participation to an end. And again, just to let you know that this meeting is being webcast and is available for people to watch live. And for those of you that are watching it live, we welcome you. And it's also available for posterity for people to watch at a later date. But as agreed earlier in the meeting, Councillor Galvin, we will be taking item number 13 on the agenda with the exclusion of press and public, and so therefore there will not be a live stream for that particular item. Moving on to item number 9 on the agenda, which is the annual report for 2021-2022. Again, just to give some background, sorry, Janie, just to give some background to those new members that have joined the committee. We have taken the decision to have an annual report presented to full council, and the first annual report that was presented to full council was 2 years ago. Then obviously we had the issues around COVID and what have you. So we're now in a position to present our annual report for 2021-2022. I'm going to hand over to Janie to speak to this particular item.
Thank you, Chair. As members will or may recall, or apologies, but you're new to this as well, we brought a draft annual report to the last meeting for consideration. We've taken feedback from that meeting and also any feedback received from the Chair and Vice Chair of the committee, and we now provide the amended proposed annual report. And if members approve this evening, this will go to full council on the 14th of July. So if you refer to the minutes on page 2, we were asked to complete the complaints section, which at that time we couldn't do because we weren't at the end of the municipal year. And we also were asked to include details on dispensations and training that we provided on the code of conduct. And therefore, any further views or observations are are sought, and this will be published with your approval with the full council agenda on the 14th. And just if I may, we do have a later agenda item which is around City of York Council's response to the Committee for Standards in Public Life review of local government ethical standards, and it's actually a best practice recommendation that that standards committees produce an annual report. So I'm pleased to say that this is best practice that we're already doing.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. Before I just open it up for discussion and comment, if I can just refer you to page 12 of the of your agenda item, and it talks about the makeup of the Joint Standards Committee, the City of York councillors, the parish councillors. It talks about the independent persons. We are in a position at the moment where, or towards the back end of the last municipal year, we had two independent persons, Anne Davis and David Laverick, and because of work commitments and personal commitments and just the sheer time that they had served on the committee, they were unable to attend many of the meetings, and towards the end, I think they resigned and stood down. So we found ourselves in a difficult position of having no independent persons. We did then co-opt an independent person who joined us remotely. And Mr. Oram, and he was really helpful in terms of our discussions. So just to give you an update, in fact, I'm going to pass on to Janie just to give us an update. So we have recruited independent persons, and Janie, if you're able just to give us an update on that, because it's not actually an agenda item.
No, we've recruited two independent persons. They are subject to their appointment being confirmed by annual council. By full council on the 14th of July. So they met with the chair and vice chair of audit committee yesterday, and Mr. Lee has nominated himself to sit as an independent member on audit committee and an independent person on the Joint Standards Committee. And Mr. Gadd has expressed a willingness to be an independent person on the Joint Standards Committee. Both of them will be invited to meet with the chair and vice chair. There was an open invitation yesterday to also meet with the chair and vice chair of Joint Standards Committee, but unfortunately for health reasons and professional reasons neither could make it, so we're going to hopefully rearrange that as well. They've been they're aware of the YouTube link to watch the meeting and aware of how to access the agendas, and we're going to put a form of induction in place for them as well. So myself and Francis Harrison, Deputy Monitoring Officer, are in contact and liaison with them, but we will be rearranging the introduction for you, Chair.
Good, thank you, Janie. And again, just for the benefit of those new members that have joined the committee, the independent person is a vital role within the work of this committee. The independent person is consulted, given the nature of their independence, they are consulted about every complaint that comes in, and the monitoring officer and myself in terms of where a complaint goes in accordance with the Constitution. The independent person has a very strong input into decisions that's made by the monitoring officer in terms of where a complaint goes. So I'm looking forward to working with our two new colleagues once they've been approved at full council. And again, I'd just like to register our thanks as a committee for the work that Anne Davis and David Laverick have done in the time that they were with us. So moving on in terms of the report, I've read through it. I'm happy with the report, but please, members, if you'd like to read through it, or if you haven't, it will give you a chance to comment if you wish to.
Chair, if I may, at some point.
Yes, I will come back to you, Councillor Willings, but Councillor Cobain did put his hand up just before you spoke. So
I don't have that opportunity. That's fine, absolutely, anytime. Councillor
Cobain.
Thanks, Chair. There is an advantage for getting your hand up before a disembodied voice, I must admit. Just a couple of issues.
Yeah.
In the complaints on page 12, would it be possible and useful to have comparisons with previous years? Are the complaints going up or are the complaints going down? And in the dispensations on page 14, would it be useful to have a note as to what the dispensations were about, what they were for? Just to give everything some context.
Yep. The latter of your two questions is very easy to answer, Janie, I'm sure can answer that one. But the first one, yeah, it probably isn't. I think what we can do, if you're comfortable with this, is that we can put it down as an action point and make sure that you get that comparison. And we could, I'm pretty sure prior to the meeting of full council, I'm pretty sure that we could get that comparison.
It's actually quite difficult to do because there is significant overlap over the years.
Right.
Because there is still a number of complaints outstanding that go over the municipal year dates. So it's actually quite a difficult process to do. The simplest thing I can do is append last year's annual report, because we did do a report.
Yeah,
We've put all the same details in the annual report on last year. We did report them slightly differently, but it is quite complicated because of the overlap, because they don't all naturally conclude within the municipal year.
Yeah, I don't have last year's annual report or the previous annual report on there, but you've got it on your laptop or not.
I can find it, it's linked, it's on the council agenda from when we took it, so I can circulate it to the committee.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Thank you. And sorry, again, Councillor Corbett.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Would it not just be possible to register new complaints that were made in each annual year?
We're actually monitored on the complaints that we receive, the complaints that are closed, the complaints that are pending. So I'm afraid it's not as simple as that. So this report is also features in our annual governance statement, and so is part of the evidence basket of information that we also provide to external audit. So when we come to complaints, it's actually quite complicated in terms of what we do, because there isn't a sort of a general a really easy cut-off point apart from our scheduling of them. So this is simplified as it is at the moment.
Well, surely we can say how many new complaints were received in a civic year compared to how many new complaints were received in the previous.
We can do that one, but we can't do the conclusion of them because some of them overlap so much. So in last year's sort of complaints that concluded, we'll include some of the years before. So the numbers get skewed. So we can do the high level one of how many complaints did we receive during a date period. We can do that. We just can't break it down any further than that, because that's where the overlap and the risk of duplication starts.
Okay.
Yeah, so that are you comfortable with? I mean, I think it's
you just want to know the trend, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, I totally understand that. So we're talking about the headline figure, not necessarily the breakdown of what's happened and where they've gone, but that headline figure of numbers that have come in. My only comment on that is that in itself would not give any indication of the work that this committee has done, because you could have a flurry of complaints that come in, and there could be little or no substance to most of them, but they would still be classed as a complaint that's come in. So in terms of the work of our committee, what we do, and you know, and how effective we are as a committee, having that headline number, in a sense, we can give you that headline number, but in terms of any relevance to previous numbers, it's quite woolly, really. But we're more than happy to find that out for you and give you the headline rate as requested. Sorry, I thought Councillor Fisher. And sorry, I'm aware that Councillor Rawlings also has a comment, but I've already pulled Councillor Fisher in first. Then we'll go to Councillor Rawlings.
Thank you. Bearing in mind that one complaint was upheld, one was not upheld, 19 complaints did not progress to an investigation. That does seem to suggest to me that we are getting an awful lot of complaints which may not indicate an understanding of the councillor's code of conduct by the complainants. The other question, the other part of that is, have we made any costings for the cost of all these investigations and officer time? Because I think it seems a serious issue to me.
Yeah. Janie, how you answer that one?
So no, there is no cost comparison, because you receive a complaint, each complaint is dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Some take much longer to adjudicate on in that first stage than others. Others require more detail to be obtained. There's also lots of counter complaints that come in as well, which are very heavily linked to each other, which also adds to the complexity in terms of before you can make a decision. And some complaints on that initial stage also require the establishment of an assessment subcommittee, lengthy involvement of an independent person and various members of this committee as well. So it's actually really hard to adjudicate on for that. And we don't time record in this area at all.
I mean, it is a very, very valid point and a good question to ask. I think what the new model code of conduct did for us is that it actually gave it a lot more clarity around what would be deemed to be a complaint and what would not be deemed to be a complaint. Just as an example, just for you. So if somebody makes a comment on a personal social media account, previously that potentially could have been a complaint that was made because of their link to the council. The new model code of conduct makes it very clear that whatever is said on someone's personal social media account, and not as an elected member of either a parish council or of the City of York Council, that doesn't warrant the ability of a complaint. So there's a lot more clarity around with the new model code of conduct. I think the point that you raised, which is a valid one, is how do we as a committee educate not just members but the wider public in what this committee does and how complaints are made and the relevance of a complaint, and that's maybe a wider piece that we need to look at, but it's a very valid point. Councillor Rawlings, I'm aware that you've been patiently waiting.
It's probably not necessary now, Chair, but thank you. Councillor Coombe put his hand up just before me, but also stole the thunder. I was going to point out the comparatives, how we are trending over not just last year, but actually over a few years, and looking to see if we could do maybe a piece of work for next year's report, which gave us some kind of trend lines. Yeah. And it'd be interesting to see if those trend lines picked up election cycles as well. And maybe there's some work that we could do around that for future reports. The only other point I was going to make was that this was taken to the last meeting of the Standards Committee, discussed at that meeting, and that meeting was very keen that it progressed to full council as quickly as possible. Last year's report, when we started it, was sometime into the municipal year before it was signed off by full council, and the last committee felt quite strongly that it lost some credibility with that time lapse and was very keen for it to be approved quickly. I thought new members should be aware of that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rawlings. Yes, I think such is the way in which the full council works, and we've all sat there very close to the guillotine, and we've rushed things through. And I'm afraid this is such an item that will be very, very quickly brushed along on the agenda of full council. Whether it should or it shouldn't be is not a discussion that we can really influence, but the reality is it's almost nodded through, but it's no less important that it's right in terms of what we do, and I would hope that members of full council in their agenda papers do at least read the report prior to us taking a vote on it. I see Councillor Kilbane.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just if we could have an answer to the question as to whether or not we could make a reference as to what the dispensations were about in that section of the report on page 14. So some reference to give it some context as to what the dispensations were given for. No, not going into any great detail, but a headline would be good.
Reports in the Standards Committee, and then the people can click on the link and directly.
Yeah, we can add that. That's fine. It's always difficult when you try because obviously it's myself that's granted the dispensation. It's always difficult to kind of remember the ones that you granted and what year you granted them and what meeting they were granted in. But we will get that information for you, Councillor Kilbane, and for members to have that, just to be able to see what those dispensations were.
Sorry, Chair. No, I was asking if they could be referred to in the report.
Oh yes, sorry. Yes, yeah. yes. They will be. Yeah. So, anybody else got any comments or questions? In that case, can I just ask for a show of hands for us to accept this with the inclusions that have been agreed? Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to item number 10, which is the government's response to the Committee for Standards in Public Life review of the local government ethical standards. Just prior to Janie speaking to this item, As a committee, at the last meeting, I think that you may have noticed in the minutes at the last meeting, it was requested that I, as the chair of this committee, write to the Minister of State that has responsibility for standards in public life, just requesting that they have a look at some of the sanctions that are available to us locally as a joint standards committee. I'm always careful of the word sanctions, but and sanctions always need to be appropriate, and we felt that that within our arsenal, as it were, of sanctions, it was a little bit light on what we could or couldn't do. So I did write that letter. I circulated the draft to members and got confirmation from members at the time that they were happy for me to send it. So that was sent back in April, I think, but I've still not received a response, but it may well be that response is in this report. So I'm going to hand over to Janie to take us through.
Chair, this report has been provided on the request of the meeting on the last occasion when, quite timely, the government issued its formal response to the Committee for Standards in Public Life review of local government ethical standards, which it originally issued in 2019. So it was quite a delayed response that's been received. There are a number of recommendations put into the government, put by the Committee of Standards in Public Life to the government, and the government has now responded. I've drafted this report in line with the government's response. I'm pleased to say that overall, the City of York Council has responded very positively to where it can to the recommendations that were made in 2019. However, obviously our hands are tied where formal legislation, primary legislation is required, such as sanctions in Standards Committee. And I'm happy to take questions, really, Chair. It's quite a detailed report. We've already made reference to the annual report, which it is a recommendation that it's a good practice for joint standards committees to put an annual report together. So that is clear evidence that we're already complying with these. But Chair, I'm happy to take questions. As we've already mentioned as well, this at the time of writing this, in recommendation 8, paragraph 23, we were going through a recruitment exercise at that particular time because this was written prior to the closing date, and you've already updated the committee on the position of independent persons. So I'm quite happy to take any questions, Chair, as it's quite detailed.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'm going to give you a couple of moments just to acquaint yourself with the report. I'm sure many of you have already read through it, and then I will open it up for questions or discussion. So I will, just before I open it up, I will just say on page 19, recommendation 16, I referred a moment ago to a letter that I wrote to the Minister of State on behalf of the committee. It was very much around local authorities being given power to suspend councillors, which we currently don't have, and so that was one of the questions that we asked of the Secretary of State, the Minister, forgive me, not the Secretary of State. So as is the answer, that it would require legislation to be changed by the government. That's what we've asked for. It would, and you, Councillor Galvin. Sorry, but I know you. That's okay.
I personally don't agree with it, actually, but so be it. I think you'd need to have an appeal process, and you talk about money being staffed on this, that, and t'other, and I think, you know, appeals don't come cheap.
No,
and I do understand it, and I've often said that Standards Board really, at the end of the day, is toothless, quite frankly. But I don't know that there is a better alternative to it.
Yeah,
I think once you go down this route, you're getting yourself mixed up into all sorts of issues.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. What you'll be pleased to know is that your predecessor had exactly the same comments.
Don't get me wrong, I do agree with the sentiment behind it, but I don't agree with it in practical terms.
Yeah, and again, I can't speak for the government, but there's maybe a reason why that hasn't come through.
I don't think it will, actually.
Yeah, but anyway, but you know, all I can do is as the as the committee at the time requested of me, and that was to write to the Secretary of State, which I did, requesting that they review that. But thank you, Councillor Galvin. Anybody got any questions or queries or clarifications? I'll go to Councillor De Goy and then Councillor Fisher.
Possibly more of an observation, which Janie will come on to, but it does seem as though, I understand to be correct, the majority of the recommendations which have local discretion we're already doing, and those that are slightly more involved that require legislation, so we don't have any choice in that matter. And just a personal observation as somebody who's been on the council, not quite as long as Councillor Galvin, but not far off. It does seem, a lot of these things do seem to go full circle, and as referenced here, you know, up until about a decade ago, we had a whole national infrastructure and a standards board and so forth, which was quite significant cost and burden, but equally a relatively robust system. And then around about 2011, if I remember rightly, the pendulum swung completely the other way, and councils had very little powers to enforce standards. And although I'm new to this committee, I have gone through some standards training in the past and seem to recall that the situation post 2011 was much more down to the worst centuries, some sort of public shaming in the full council meeting, you know, which, depending on the individual, may or may not be a particular sanction of concern to them. So, you know, I acknowledge a lot of what you've got in here, and certainly we can come on to discuss, you know, particular things we would like to see happen or not like to see happen, but they will require further legislation to make those changes.
Yeah.
Just as a point of interest, when we decided to get rid of the National Standards Board, I think I'm right in saying that the larger number of complaints were against parish councils.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other? Sorry, Councillor Fisher. Yes, you did.
Thank you. I was just looking at recommendations 3 and recommendations 4, which seem to me to be slightly contrary to each other. Council should presume to be acting in official capacity in their public conduct, including statements on publicly accessible social media. What does that apply to me on a YouTube video? You know, commenting on that social media, it's, you know, it's a publicly accessible site. I think that's taking it too far. I think recommendation 4 has it right, where if you are giving the impression of acting or giving an opinion on behalf of the local authority or whatever in your official capacity, that's fine. And I totally agree with that. I think recommendation 3 is going far too far. No, I hope it won't, but touch wood, it's not proposing to change legislation. I think we should resist that. There are some forums where I'm not suggesting that members should ever go around making racist, sexist, homophobic views, but you can express quite strong views sometimes, and that's perfectly legitimate. And you shouldn't be hauled to the coals for having private opinions. But if you're speaking as a representative of the local authority, then you have to be a damn sight more careful.
Yep, I wouldn't disagree. Councillor Cobain.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was going to raise that issue as well, Councillor Fisher, because there does seem to be a contradiction between what the intention of recommendation 3 is and what we've actually done within the City of York Council. Because I think you said before, Chair, that if you're acting in a personal capacity, then it wouldn't be covered by our code of conduct. But if you're acting in an official capacity, then it would. Is that the situation that we've got in York at the moment?
So Jamie can find the actual wording that's in there, but when we looked at the model code of conduct that the LGA had written, and it was adopted by YLCA and by ourselves and by the City of York Council, one of the areas that was clearly highlighted, and was around the commenting and the use of social media. I agree that as you look at a recommendation 3 and recommendation 4, there seems to be some disparity between the two, but I am pretty clear that you should be allowed to speak in a social media context, as long as you're not airing your view as an elected member. That again, Janie can probably find the.
So there is a difference, Chair, in the code between, but you've got to make it very clear that you are in a private capacity as opposed to as a councillor capacity. So on your social media, for example, there is a reasonable assumption that if there's photographs with you wearing, for your lanyard, for want of a better description, which clearly identifies you as linked to a City of York, you've got a councillor subtitle or disclaimer or something on a picture, or there's some photographs that show you as your councillor capacity or linked with councillor capacity, there's a reasonable assumption that any comment that you make, even if it's on a private media, I don't really know what you call them, but entries or posts, I think, a reasonable member of the public could presume, because you're linked with, somehow visibly linked with City of York, that is standing in the shoes of being a councillor. If, however, it is your private Facebook thing, for example, or social media commentary, and it's clear that there's no real intention to be linked with City of York, it's you as Mr. A.N. individual, private capacity, then it's much harder to claim that you're standing in the shoes of being a councillor and making those comments. So it's just about being very clear of what you're doing and just making sure that you're not holding yourself out as a councillor. The test is always the reasonable assumption of the member of the public. So if they read something and they see something or follow you, is it assumption that they're following you because is it fair to say their assumption is because you're a councillor, or it's because you're their next door neighbour, for example? So it's a very, very fine line. The new code is largely untested at the moment. The old code and the old assumptions became quite tested in courts. And the new code is too new yet to have any definitive definitions via the judiciary being given. So it's still very much in its learning phase of being implemented, because it's still not implemented nationally yet. There are still some councils who have yet to implement it for a variety of reasons. So it is really still in its infancy, if I may say that, Chair. But I do think it is the caution needs to be, and the mindfulness needs to be, the duty of the councillor as well, of how you believe you are portrayed by a reasonable member of the public. That is the test.
Yeah, and sorry, go on.
I mean, and it is a fine line, isn't it? And these are issues of free speech, which are very important. But again, I suppose the possibility is that as we stand now, it gives unscrupulous councillors a place to hide, doesn't it? If they go online and say things that are untrue or misleading, then it gives them a defence and a place to hide. Whereas with the code would apply as to whether or not what they said was untrue or misleading or against the breach of the code, regardless of the identity that they were using at the time that they said it. So it could be, it could be beefed up, and I think that's what recommendation 3 is trying to do. And I think it would be better to err on that side, so that if somebody, regardless of the guise that they chose to go under online, said something that was in breach of the code, they could still be held accountable for that, regardless of the identity that we're using, on the grounds of whether or not what they said was true or, defamatory or whatever it was.
Yeah, I think if I might just come back to that, Councillor Cobain, I think that there is always a legal option for anybody to challenge something that is said that is defamatory or untrue, whether it's said on social media, whether it's said in the pub, whether it's said in the witness of next door neighbour. That legal framework is there to challenge somebody that says something that's untrue. In terms of standards, I think what the new model code of conduct that came down from the LGA, the YLCA, and then ultimately discussed within this committee, I think what that sought to do was to enable an individual to have freedom of speech, and not to fall foul of a complaint because someone didn't like what they said and knew that they were a councillor. So I think it's a very fine line, and I think it's something that we just need to see it settle down and see it embedded. But in terms of giving people an opportunity to say what they like, when they like, to who they like, you know, that the ability to challenge something that's either spoken or written legally has been in place for many years, and I know that there are situations where you know, people have been taken to task irrespective of whether they're an elected member or not. But I think in terms of the code of conduct, I think we need to be able to allow members privately to have a freedom of speech without fear of anybody bringing a standards complaint because they happen to know that they're a councillor. I think Janie made a very clear comment there that even though it might be a private account that you are making a comment on, forgive me, I will take out individual personalities, but the position. So if a Lord Mayor is stood with their Lord Mayor's robes and chains, and you know, on their private account as a picture of them saying or doing something that would be defamatory, even though that was their private account, they would clearly be recognised because of the chains of office that they were wearing. So I think we are in the early stages of how this will work. I think it's something that we need to look at and review on a regular basis. But one of the things I think is important, and it was mentioned around this table a moment ago, and it's an agenda item a little bit later on in the meeting, and that's training, and that's training for members around standards, around what we can and what we can't do, understanding what the code of conduct does and what the code of conduct allows, and I think once we're able to have a robust training regime for members, hopefully we will see complaints that are relevant and right looked at and given credence, and those that aren't, hopefully, would fall by the wayside. But I hope that answers your question. Yeah, thank you.
Just a bit of clarity, really, because it seems to me it's about whether or not the parish councillor or the councillor is talking about council business or whether they're talking about personal business. So, for example, if I went on Twitter or the York Press website and told a whole load of untruths about council policy, but said that's just my personal opinion, would that be a defence?
If you were identified as a councillor Kilbane of City of York Council, and you made those comments, forgive me, just for wider discussion, Councillor De Goyne, as the executive member for transport, made comments that were, you know, irrespective of what medium he used or you used for those, if you're identified in those comments, then clearly you couldn't then turn around and say, oh, but this is my personal view. If you've gone to the City of York, if you've gone, forgive me, to the York Press, if you've gone to any medium that you have clearly demonstrated who you are, you know, I think whilst it's good to have this discussion, and I certainly, you know, we're not going to have any fix-it-all solutions at this meeting. I think the policy as it is and the code of conduct as it is, you know, it does allow us to review it, and there will be cases that will test the code of conduct, and you know, following those cases, we may or may not need to make any changes to the code of conduct. But you know, we've followed the LGA and the YLCA, and we've had a full and frank discussion in this committee around the draft code of conduct, which has, you know, it has been approved by full council, of which we were all members, and that's where we're at the moment. But I really appreciate your thoughts and your comments, Councillor Kilbane. Anybody else? Yep, again.
Just on recommendation 17 on page 20, I know that there have been occasions where councillors have been barred from the premises, and I was just wondering what the decision-making process is for that. Like, who decides that? Is that a security question? Is that down to the security staff, or is there a higher level of decision making with that?
Yeah, so Jamie.
I'm afraid, Councillor Kilbane, I'm not aware of any councillors being barred.
So tell me when it means.
It's just that if we are going to have a policy, we really need to be clear as to who makes that decision and in what circumstances.
So my knowledge is only been used once. In all the years I've been involved, going back before you. Even going back over the years before I got on the city council here, my involvement with local government with another hat on, I've never ever heard of it before. But I think, to be fair, there has to be some kind of behave yourself, and I've no problem with the one that was done, but I'll tell you all about it.
Okay, I just
Kind of look forward to it, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to bring Janie in and then Councillor Fisher.
I totally agree. The well-being and safety of staff and members must be paramount in such matters. If there is a risk to the health of any member or any member of staff, then you have to ban the offender and have a complete set of conditions under which that member can be returned to the office, West offices. And which brings me to another point, which we touched on earlier, about whether or not councillors there should be a sanction to actually suspend councillors. This can be a really thorny problem. I mean, I've seen one council meeting where a councillor simply set out to disrupt the whole council meeting, and everyone sat there for 2 hours with him having been given a Section 2 notice to move from the meeting, him refusing to do so, the police having to be called and so on. And how do you deal with councillors who do set out to do that, sometimes on a repeated basis? Now, I totally agree that suspending a councillor, especially without allowances, is an extremely major step, and there has to be an appeal, but there has to be some way of dealing with it. I mean, without going into specific detail, there's been a case not too far away from here where one councillor has been removed from a meeting 5 times in succession. Okay. And I think that's now in the public domain. And
that's always available, actually, for councillors not behaving themselves in that way. I have no problem with that.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, so I'm just we've got a number of lights.
You'll never ever completely legislate for bad behaviour.
No.
End of.
No.
Okay, if I can just thank you very much, Councillor Fisher. Thank you very much, Councillor Galvin. So coming back to the question about barring from council premises, and really picking up on what Councillor Fisher mentioned there. So you will, I'm sure, over the course of the next municipal year, be involved as members of this committee in subcommittees that take place to look at complaints that move to that particular stage. I can say from my experience as the chair of this committee that the monitoring officer and her staff go to great lengths to ensure the safety not only of the members of that particular subcommittee, but also the staff, to the point that in the past, you know, the police have been notified of potential issues that may arise during a subcommittee. I don't want to scare you off, but you know, we take this the safety of members and staff absolutely, you know, as a priority. So I can say to you that you know, there have been situations where these meetings were not our committee meetings, but subcommittee meetings can get heated. They can be very emotive, but our safety ultimately is paramount. And I know that the monitoring officer and their staff do take that very, very seriously and do take steps to ensure that we are protected. One of the things that we have done, and this was at the last meeting, and if you look in your minutes, it may well have been in there, is that if you wish your details to be removed from the council website, and we can do that for you. If you felt that would be a step that you want to take, please just do inform either myself as chair or the monitoring officer, and we can have your details removed, your personal details removed from the council website in terms of your contact details. 1 or 2 members have actually done that. I haven't, because I think everyone knows where I live, whether I'm the chair of the joint standards or, or a local funeral director. Other funeral directors are available, but that is entirely available to you should you wish to have your details removed. Okay, moving on. Is that okay? Yeah, lovely. Thank you. So I'm just, Councillor Rawlings, do you have anything else to add? I'm just aware that you're there in the ether.
No, I'm quite content with that, Chair. A little bit of explanation on one point would, I think, maybe help. It was recommendation number 2, and it was to do with the addresses. I'm just looking for the piece of paper now. I'm a little bit confused because we have removed certain addresses. So does this only relate to applicants? Maybe the monitoring officer could just give us some advice.
So, Chair, legislation has already changed in respect of candidates who stand for election, so that they don't have to put their public details into the public domain because, whether they're successful or not. So that legislation has changed. However, there's still a legal requirement that anybody who is elected has to, as kind of slightly contradict what Councillor Rowley has just said. There is still a legal requirement that we are required to publish contact details and also declaration of interest details in terms of, for example, land that you own, which is ordinarily your home. However, what we are doing, and there is a growing support for this now, is that with the members' consent, monitoring officers holds that information as confidential information, and we put care of details of, for example, the main council building. And as long as you're contactable, so that will be using your council website, an email address, and your council telephone number if we issue you with a council telephone, which we can. And as long as you're contactable, that is fine. If I'm asked, however, for details of your home address, for example, or the land that you own, which is a disclosable pecuniary interest, I'm required to provide that. So I'm required to hold it, but I do that with your in consultation with you if you are the member that's withheld your information. Some very big councils up and down the country who have chosen to remove councillor information, personal information. So, for example, Manchester took that step after the bombing. And now all contact details are via democratic services, via the council, so as to take a step to protect their democratically elected citizens.
Chair, I appreciate that clarity for the monitoring officer. It was just a bit of a mix match there. You commented that you still had your details up there as public. This committee has had some concerns about public addresses following certain hearings that we've held. I've decided to remove mine in light of that, but actually I'd like to just voice that I'm very disappointed that we got to a position where I had to do so. Democratically, I think that's wrong.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rawlings. We appreciate what you're saying there.
I might say, Chair, it's a sad state of affairs. I've always believed that councillors should be easily contactable, but I do understand the security risks, and we're in a different ball game to what we were a number of years ago. Yeah. I mean, I put my home number on, mobile number and address on the website because I believe that I should be available to members of my ward, but I do understand the security issues.
I think,
sad, very sad.
I think, sorry, I'll come back to you in a minute, Councillor Fisher. I think the situation, Janie was quite right to contradict me. You do need to have some contact information available, so you can't just have a blank on the council's website. You have to be contactable through either your as Janie has said, through your email address or through the council offices. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. Yes, I don't remove my details because if you went to Strengths and asked anyone to tell me, it would tell you where I live anyway. I think everybody knows. But there is a slight democratic issue with this, which is the fact that if you don't have to put your name down, people don't know whether you live within the ward or not. And some people do take that very seriously about electing people who live locally. And that is, a slight democratic issue. And I think that's sad.
You've got to qualify to stand anyway.
You do, but people don't. You can stand in Strenton and live, for example, in Pocklington. If you work in York, you're still entitled.
So, yeah, I want to try and give as much opportunity for discussion. So, John, if you can just, I know it's tempting to, as we're around the table, just to say what you want to say, but if you can just come through the chair, that would be really helpful. We do value your comments very, very much, but it would be helpful if you could just come through the chair rather than just simply saying what you think. Councillor De Goin.
Just hopefully to conclude this item, this is here for us to note with, although individuals might have expressed views on some of these recommendations, just for clarity, we're not actually endorsing the recommendations. We're just noting what has been done locally within those that are in our powers to do something about them.
Correct.
And on that basis, I do welcome the report. But nevertheless, it's useful information to understand, some of the things that the Committee for Standards in Public Life has put forward, and as you'll have heard, there are differing views on whether or not they are appropriate. But obviously, at such point in time, if we're asked as a committee for views on those, then we can debate them in a bit more detail.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor De Goin. And I think that nicely wraps this particular item up. It's noted. And what I would simply just add to those very helpful comments that have been made by the committee is that, that particular document and the recommendations, it's almost like a working document. It's dynamic. It'll change as things change, but it's good for us as a committee to be aware of it and to have noted it. Taking you on to agenda item number 11. And this is the development of a member training programme for ethical governance framework. Again, I'm going to ask Janie to speak to this, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
So, Chair, thank you. As many of you will be aware, the Audit and Governance Committee has been tasked by full council for delivering against the Public Interest Report Action Plan. As part of that action plan, it is also to confirm the member development programme, and it's the Audit and Governance Committee's aspiration to have that concluded by December of this year. The Audit and Governance Committee met yesterday evening and renewed its commitment to meet that timeframe, as it's its first meeting of the municipal year yesterday. And they've also invited the Joint Standards Committee to contribute towards the development of that programme by focusing on the ethical governance training, which can be included as part of the overall member training package. We've included in the report suggestions of what may be included in a hopefully mandatory, subject to the views of this committee and the audit committee's training programme around ethical governance. Those are bullet pointed at paragraph 3. They're open for discussion and very open to views, as is the audit committee, about whether there are any other additional issues that this committee wants to suggest that should be part of an ethical governance training programme. As it's detailed in the report, the Audit and Governance Committee is also seeking the support of the Local Government Association, and they will report their second report to the next meeting on the 7th of September, with a view to the final report, the third report from the LGA being published and provided to the Audit Committee towards the end of this year as well. Quite happy to take on board any views and feed those back to the Audit Committee. I think it's a great opportunity for the two governance committees to work together. I'm conscious that Councillor Fisher is also the Vice Chair of Audit Committee, so perhaps it may be that Councillor Fisher also wishes to express the views on behalf of the Audit Committee Chair.
Okay, so that moves me nicely on to yourself, Councillor Fisher, if you want to just bring your thoughts from last night.
I would not presume to speak on behalf of the Audit Committee, because they are obviously a body which I'm only one member of. But the only thing I would say is about the mandatory element of the training and what sanctions could be imposed if members didn't undertake it. I mean, one possibility would be to have, because I do feel we desperately need a wider and better member training programme.
Yeah.
I mean, 50% of the councillors, or rather more than 50% of the councillors who were elected in 2019 were new to local government. I was new to local government, although I did have a seat on another council somewhere way back in the Neolithic age. So I had some understanding, but a lot has changed and we needed a training, and the induction programme I don't think was fit for purpose. And this is one area, ethical governance, which we do need to make sure that councillors do understand. And I would strongly suggest, even if what sanctions we can impose is one issue, but I do think we should have a publicly available register of member training on the website where all the training that members have had is logged, so that the public know that members are engaging with the training programme to make us better councillors.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I have some comments I'll mention to you at the end, but prior to that, Councillor Galvin.
Can I just comment? I've taken part in training sessions as a volunteer trainer. I've been involved in various training sessions for one thing or another, and I do know that over the years, political groups have run their own training sessions, political parties nationally have run their own training sessions, local authorities have run training sessions. I've been on some good ones, I've been on some bad ones, and I've never yet felt that the training session made any difference to how somebody conducted themselves once they got elected. I have to tell you, that people, as a general rule, one of the things that I try to say on more than one occasion is the most important thing that any councillor can have is the respect of the officers, and the most important thing that officers can have is the respect of the members. And if you ain't got that one way or t'other, you can train till the cows come home and you won't make any difference. And it's something I feel very strongly. And I used to say to people, you've got to make sure that the people who can help you with your role as a councillor are your best friends. And if they're not, then you're not doing your job properly. And, you know, I think it's about people's personality, about behaviour. But as I say, I've been at training sessions run by political groups in a larger authority than this. I think it ain't made the slightest of a difference. Now, I'm sorry, I don't want to pour water on what appears to be something new. It ain't really new, in all honesty. When I first got elected to a council many, many moons ago, the leader of the council said, 6 months is just keep your mouth shut and listen. And that's the best advice you can give to a new councillor. In fact, whatever you think, training or not, it's the best advice you can give. But okay. So I won't be here. So I wish you all the very best of luck. How successful it will be, well, that's for you to decide, not me.
Okay, Councillor Calvin, as always, your thoughts experience. No, and we understand that, and we received that in the spirit that it was given. As I'm going to reserve my right to comment until I've given an opportunity for others. Councillor De Goey and then Councillor Kilbane.
I think it's certainly very, very welcome, and I appreciate that. You know, there's a question about the order of training and so on when immediately after the election. There's a lot of things that have to be covered. But in terms of some of the key things about register of interests and the code of conduct, there has to be something right at the beginning. It may be that it's very simple, and it may be, verbal or virtual, or combination of that with something that you read. But certainly as a basic, I would say that until you've sort of understood some of the basics about, you need passwords for email, you need some sort of practical elements, and the register of interests. I think there's a deadline, isn't there, a certain period of time by which you have to put that information onto the website. So I would say that until you do those key actions, you don't get one of these. And if you want a sanction, that you basically become accredited as a councillor with some basic core rules and regulations.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Kilbane.
No, thanks. Can I just make a plea that the equalities training is developed with appropriate stakeholder groups? Yeah. So people with protected characteristics, and also that it's delivered by people with lived experience with protected characteristics.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Rawlings from the Ether.
I'm quite happy with the comments that have been made, Chair. I personally tend to favour more of a controlled mandatory training programme, because I think that training programme is more about people having a knowledge and the ability. Councillor Leong talked about passwords, but also the knowledge comes into an understanding of what your responsibilities are. You make that mandatory. I am a bit concerned about a full register of training. I have to say, to be open and frank, I'm concerned that that's used to political advantage, and you may well have some councillors who are less interested in certain areas, therefore their training plan doesn't look as comprehensive as other councillors, and that wasn't the intention with the discussions that we've had earlier in the year. We wanted to give people the skills and the knowledge. If they don't take them on board, Councillor Galvin is absolutely spot on. There is a group of people and it make no difference to them. But that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't make sure that they have the opportunity.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rawlings. I am aware that the Audit and Governance Committee did want a public register of interest when they had their discussions yesterday. That was something that was quite
Registered training. Yeah.
Registered training. Sorry, forgive me, not interest, training. Yes, forgive me, sorry. Register of interest in my head. Councillor De Goin set me off there with the timeline that you've got for register of interest. Thank you very much for your comments there to all of you. I think just to add my comments is that both as a member of this committee and as the chair, and as somebody who came into local government later in life as a first-time appointed councillor 3 years ago, of a group that didn't have the resources to give us the training that some of the other groups potentially do have. I think for me the training really falls into two categories. There's an initial training that's both kind of mandatory but also advisory, and I think Councillor De Goin's kind of touched on that in terms of things that like your practical requirements, and then there's a mandatory training for things like your licensing, your planning and what have you. I know that I wasn't able to substitute my colleague on the planning committee until I'd done the planning training. I wasn't available for the only one planning training session that was put in the diary, and so therefore I waited several weeks before I could have a private training session with one of the planning officers to be able to tick that box. So I think the induction training is something that we do need to look at, and I think it's timely given that we've got another 10 or 11 months before we go to the polls again, to make sure that what we have in place for the newly elected members or the re-elected members in May next year is robust, but actually is fit for purpose. So there's that initial training that has to happen, and again, I'm pretty sure that there will be members who will be re-elected for the 4th, 5th, maybe even 6th time that might think that they don't need to do the training, but again, we can maybe look at that both as A&G and also as joint standards as to whether it's a mandatory requirement for you to receive your okay. Sorry, I'm just, Councillor, forgive me, Councillor Galvin, I really do appreciate your comments. They are very valued, but please, just for the sake of those that are watching, and also just the formality of the committee, if you do want to say anything, just pop your hand up. I will see it, and then use your microphone to speak so that it can be recorded. But thank you, Janie.
If the members of the audit committee, supported by members of this committee, express a wish that training is mandatory, it would be very hard for members not to do it, because these are the two overarching governance committees, and that would be members with self-regulating members. So officers can't insist that training is mandatory unless it's relating to code of conduct, which is part of an induction process, which is part of the comments that Councillor De Goin made around the whole ethos about becoming a councillor, and also licensing and planning. And there is also data protection, information security training, which is mandatory, and that should be undertaken by members every year. And apart from that, it's really, if the Audit and Governance Committee expresses a strong wish that training is mandatory or a package of training is mandatory, then that would be viewed by officers as trying to carry out the wishes of members of the Audit Committee. So it's if they have a strong wish.
Yeah, thank you for that clarity there, Janie. So just coming back to my kind of closing comments on this particular agenda item. So obviously that induction initial training is something that we need to get right. It needs to be fit for purpose. It needs to be robust. But I think something that is really important is that we have ongoing training. I think things change and develop in such a way that what we maybe learned 3 years ago, is different now. And now, how that training is formulated, how it's monitored, that's discussions for us as a committee and for A&G moving forward. Is it monitored and looked after by individual groups? Is it done centrally by officers? These are questions that we can't answer tonight, but it's part of what we need to do in terms of getting a robust training program in place, not just for initial induction training, but also ongoing professional development, if you would. But what I would like you just to focus on in terms of where we go with this item, paragraph number 3, there were some bullet points there that are going to be included in some form of training. Are you satisfied that those, and thank you, Councillor Kilbane, for your urgent comment about the equalities training, but are you satisfied that there is enough there, or are there any bullet points that you think we probably missed, or that we need to go and talk to A&G about? Councillor Kilbane.
The only other area that might be useful for new councillors is a good understanding of what the public interest is, whether that's public interest duties or whistleblowing or whatever it is, so that they understand their role within that.
Yeah, no, really good point. Again, that would probably form part of an initial induction training package. Anything else? Councillor Burgoyne.
One of the practical points that was made, I think that training has to be made available in different formats and take account of the fact that some councillors will have either work responsibilities, personal responsibilities in terms of timing, to offer mandatory training on a working day for the whole day is not going to be right for everybody. It might suit some new councillors, but others will need it in different formats. So that needs to be taken into account.
So I am aware, and I don't know forgive me if I've got this wrong. My understanding is that the next cohort of councillors that are elected in May next year will receive City of York laptops, whether you want them or not, and on those laptops will be all that you need, including your ability to access online training. So for those people that, as you quite rightly mentioned there, Councillor Coyne, aren't able to physically attend meetings, that they will be the facility to be able to undertake the training virtually, and I'm presuming that will be registered somewhere. Janie, if you can contradict me again.
At the moment, the plan is that there is a need for some physical presence training, because obviously we need to meet you all, and for various security reasons, you need to have your photograph taken and also, so you are going to have some physical attendance. All of the training is being planned on a hybrid basis as well. So that, and with again a register of attendance. So you're either in a classroom style such as this, but with some people on the screen to accommodate as much as we possibly can. So the current plan or premise is that it is a very much a blended offer of hybrid training. All of the sessions will be recorded. As Councillor Rowley says, that everybody will hopefully receive a laptop, regardless of whether you want one or not, because that is for information security, data protection reasons. And also it's a safeguard for us to make sure that council property, i.e. information, is kept safe on a council secure network. with appropriate virus protections, etc. So it will all be on there that you cannot delete or wipe accidentally. So it will be there so that in your own time, you can also watch sessions again as a reminder, watch some of the sessions as a first time, go back to them at a later stage. And hopefully, if technology allows and the training progresses as well, they will be updated and automatically uploaded to your laptop as well.
Good, thank you. Thank you for that, Janie. So just moving this item to a conclusion, what I would like to do with your approval is myself and the Vice Chair to continue to work closely with Audit and Governance in terms of developing this and obviously bring it back on the workflow, which we're going to discuss in a moment, so that we can see where we are with that. What I would also say is that the bullet points that we've looked at, please don't feel that it's now or never in terms of speaking. If you do feel that there should be something added to it once you've had a look through, then please do feel free to contact myself or Janie, and we can ensure that those bullet points are discussed with Audit and Governance. So can I just have your affirmation that you're happy for me to proceed in that way? Lovely. Thank you very much for that. Okay, brings us on to item number 12, which is the work plan for joint standards. So prior to the next full council meeting, we have 5 meetings of the Joint Standards Committee. I'm mindful of the fact that, again, myself and Councillor Fisher and Councillor Rawlings have experienced it. Those new members of the committee will I'm sure experience that over the next 12 months. There is quite a lot required of the members of this committee when we're not sitting as a committee. The formation of subcommittees does require both Parish Council and the City of York Council members to sit on these subcommittees. If last year was anything to go by, and I appreciate Councillor Bain's request for comparisons, but if last year was anything to go by, then we are going to have a very, very busy year. So whilst I don't want to water down what we do here in our main Joint Standards Committee, I'm just mindful of the fact that we have potentially a busy year ahead of us within subcommittees, and so therefore the work plan moving forward for me, if we can keep it quite succinct, but relatively dynamic in terms of the ability to pull in stuff that we might have to pull in at short notice. I'm pretty comfortable with the work plan as it is. But I'm happy to take comments from you as members. So, we're looking particularly at the 15th of September work plan. Yeah, thank you, Janie.
Chair, since our last meeting, I've now received a request from the YLCA to attend a meeting, and this is following an offer by this committee a couple of months ago to the YLCA to help and assist and encourage parish councils, so to build links and relationships. So the YLCA are willing to hopefully attend, subject to your invitation, the September meeting, or failing that, the November meeting.
Okay.
Also, as you just said earlier, member development either needs to feature on the 15th of September and 17th, or perhaps the 17th of November, just as Audit and Governance Committee is at the end of November, currently subject to accounts being finalised. So those are the only 2 items that I would raise, Chair.
Okay. I would probably, if members are minded, I would probably want to have a look at the member development in the September meeting as well. Maybe not an in-depth, but just an update as to where we are with that prior to discussing it in a more fuller discussion on the 17th. So for me, I would probably want member development on both meetings. I don't know what the thoughts of the committee are. There seems to be no
Chair for me.
Notice anything, Councillor Rawlings?
Yeah, just quickly, Chair for me. I had written down training development as well, and I think we do need to bring that back in September. because you've been given the remit with a new vice chair to talk to audit and governance. So some feedback at that point I think will be very appropriate. I know audit and governance are very keen to wrap up that well in advance of the election period, so that there's no delay to new members hitting the ground running. The other thing that I'd written down was from some comments this evening from newer members and some discussion on the social media, and I hate to come back to this again and again, but it would appear that we've looked at the social media policy a number of times over the last couple of years, but still it's not clear as to where people do stand from a personal comments and comments made as a councillor. And new members have expressed that concern this evening. So we might be trying and formulating the view, but for some reason we're not getting that into the minds of the membership out there with the clarity that's actually needed. So I propose that at some point in the year we actually bring that back and we discuss that again. And I would suggest well in advance of when that social media side is going to naturally hype up now, leading into an election period.
Okay, yeah, I take on what you're saying. My own kind of slight hesitation about what you're saying, Councillor Rawlings, is that we have
yeah,
as a committee we've approved the model code of conduct. We have put it to full council. We've approved the model code of conduct. We can't change that per se, but I think it's right that we do review it. And I would probably say to bring that to the 19th of January meeting. I think we've got, if we're looking at the 15th of September meeting, we've got the YLCA attendance with your approval, members, and then we've got obviously member development along with what we've already got on there. I think that makes the September meeting relatively full. The November meeting, again, there are 3 items on there. Possibly we could look at it there. But I think, failing that, possibly the January meeting. But I'm happy for it to go on the work plan if members so require. And there seems to be nods of approval there. So what I'll do, we'll put it into November, but we may knock that back into January, depending on where we are when we come to look at the work plan moving forward. Do any of the members have any other comments about the work plan, anything that you think we should be looking at? Councillor Kilbane.
If we could just have an explanation, well, I was going to say for everybody watching on YouTube, but I've just checked and there isn't anybody. So if they could just have an explanation for me what the YLCA is.
Okay, Janie.
I'm going to try this. It's the Yorkshire Local Councils Association, and it's the network that supports our 31 parish councils. However, Stockton on the Forest is not a member, but their clerk is a joint clerk with another parish council who is a member, though Stockton do not and are not entitled to receive the information from YLCA. So it's a key support group for parish councils, and it's a key stakeholder for this committee.
And town councils as well.
Yes, and Taxby Town Council is included in the 31.
Just for clarity. Sorry, Janie. Okay. So can I just have an approval that we're comfortable with the work plan as we've agreed it this evening? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So that brings us that brings us on to that brings us on to agenda item number 13. And if you recall, we did agree that we would exclude the press and public from this. So for those of you that may be watching this at a later date, because I understand there's nobody currently watching it, thank you for your time. We will not be coming back into public session after we've looked at item number 13 on the agenda. But at this moment in time, just to record that Councillor Fisher has now left the meeting, and we are going to end the public viewing of this meeting, and there are no press and public here to be excluded physically. Thank you very much. And you can just give